All right. Well, thank you, Amris. That was great. While the number of entries for the McKinney Prize has fluctuated from year to year, the speeches are consistently competitive. Our first member of the class of 2027 is Samantha Seepersad, whose speech is on the importance of environmental storytelling. Welcome, Samantha.
I knew I wanted to be an author for the longest time. It started when I wrote my first novel in 6th grade, and eventually I had written 3 more. But then I got to the point in my life where I was applying to colleges, and the question of my career felt more real and heavy. Despite having written an entire series, I suddenly doubted if I could actually make a living writing novels. Not only that, but I wanted to make a positive impact with my career. But most of what I had written was fantasy that didn't touch on any real-world issues. After some thought, I decided that I would write about environmental issues because of my passion for them. But then I began to think, just how would fiction actually help with environmental issues? I mean, it's not like I'm chasing after some governmental position creating policies or boating out into the ocean collecting plastic. I'm just writing about them. What could a story do to help? Well, actually, communication is an effective tool in helping but also worsening environmental issues. Let's take climate change as an example. Scientists have been sure about climate change for a while, and yet it took a long time for people to believe them because they presented it with statistics and data that isn't as easy to understand for the general public. For example, a scientist today might say, in 2024, we hit 425 parts per million of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, approximately 125 parts per million higher than the highest peak in the last 800,000 years during the Milankovitch cycles. And the last time it was this high was roughly 3 million years ago during the mid-Pliocene warm period. How many of you understood what I just said? Exactly, it just flies right over your head. And then, when people who rely on fossil fuels for income, such as large business owners, saw that suddenly they were not supposed to use fossil fuels anymore, well, they thought their companies would collapse and they couldn't just stand by and let that happen. Businesses know how to talk to people, so they could twist the facts that scientists presented in order to get people to doubt them. Thus, they could delay efforts to reduce resource consumption and emissions so that consumers will continue to put money in their pockets. Even today, there's still a lot of greenwashing and misinformation. And greenwashing is when companies provide misleading information so that the public would continue to believe that they are being more sustainable than they actually are. But communication can be used in a positive way as well. As an example, I'm going to tell you a story. So my grandparents used to live in Hawaii, and they had this small house somewhat close to the beach, and they loved to take long walks and bird watch, and my grandpa loves to mimic the whistles of birds. There's this one day that my grandpa always tells me about, and it's when they came across a kauai'o'o bird. It's this black bird with a long curved beak, very rare and endemic to Hawaii. They didn't actually see this bird, but they could hear its call through the tropical air. And my grandpa was absolutely starstruck. Anyways, they moved from Hawaii, but in the early 90s, they actually traveled back because they came across a recording of a male kauai'o'o bird's song. And this song is meant to be a duet between a male and a female, but the male did not know that he was the last of his kind. And it's so eerie and lonely. And my grandparents were absolutely devastated that they traveled back to Hawaii to take one last walk and reminisce on how they would never hear this song again. And that is the power of storytelling. Did my grandparents actually live in Hawaii and hear this kauai'o'o bird? No. Wrong island, at least. My grandpa is really into birds, but what's most important is that the story of the recording is real. I mean, can you imagine being the last human on Earth? Everyone else has died and you're just wandering around looking for someone to hold on to. The emotion from that story is real, and that's what drives people and gets them to do something about it. Now, what's sad is that a lot of these stories have been told so much that they're becoming cliches. I could have told you a story about a polar bear or a coral reef, but you've likely heard about those before, and it wouldn't have the same impact. So you might ask me, if these stories are being told so much, then why aren't we doing more about them? Well, a huge component of these stories is that they focus on the problems, which is great at first. But now we know the problems and we know why they're horrible. So continuing to just talk about them doesn't do as much. We need a shift in environmental storytelling from all the apocalyptic stories where half the humans are dead and wildfires run rampant to hopeful stories. A shift from instilling fear for what our future could look like to raising hope for what it should. We need stories where there are forests and cities and solar panels on every roof. Stories where we realize we are not a disease to the earth, but our mindset is the disease. And thus our salvation becomes the realization that we are not separate from nature, but part of it. And thus we begin to care for other beings as much as humans. We need stories that connect to people's souls and this vision of harmony. Stories that provide solutions instead of statistics and data and problems that seem so vast that people don't want to think about them and thus they don't do anything with them. We need stories that tell us it is possible to create a better world. Take Robin Wall Kimmerer's Braiding Sweetgrass, for example. Beautiful book that blends nonfiction with a narrative and poetic style to show the reader what it feels like to reconnect with nature and have a healthy mindset. Or Rachel Carson's Silent Spring, which led to the ban of the deadly pesticide DDT because it not only presented the problems, but also the solutions. Stories may not directly stop fossil fuel emissions or plastic pollution, but the good ones get their audience to care and let them know what they can be doing to help. They present all this scientific data in an attractive and understandable way. And without fiction, it's easy to miss the emotional significance of why we fight for these things. It lets us know that we can only do the best we can. And in the end, that's enough to decide the story of our future. Thank you.